Hello, and welcome to Web Relates. Today we're looking at the Malicious Compliance subreddit. Our first story is from Petite Petch Pep. I should talk to HR about leave if I'm legitimately having trouble at work 1 week before my due date? Sure thing, boss. This happened last year. I, female 31, was 1 week away from my due date and was working full-time in school administration position. At this time I had the capability to work from home if needed. For example, too sick to come into work, catch up on extra work, unable to secure daycare for my child, etc. When I accepted the position prior to my pregnancy, I was told by my boss, let's call her Ronnie, that it was very flexible as long as I got my hours in. I very rarely worked from home and typically only did so for an hour or two in the morning if it was needed later on in order to work before obgyn appointments, as it was a long commute between work and home/the doctor office. However, I was told by Ronnie after accepting the position to try and limit work from home to 2 days a month, which, fine, at this point I was well under since I was only working an hour or two maybe twice a month, and only once a month before that. Being so close to my due date, I was experiencing physical hardships that made working on site more and more difficult, such as dizzy spells, a pulled tendon in my foot, and severe back pain. I was also scared of potentially going into labour while at work, with it being so far away from the hospital my obgyn delivers at. To top it all off, my co-workers started asking more invasive questions about my pregnancy that made me uncomfortable. All in all, it was not a fun time. I explained all of this in an email to Ronnie and asked for her permission to almost exclusively work from home up until I go into labour. I said I thought it would be a reasonable accommodation, and I work really well from home. Ronnie responded a couple days later denying my request to work from home at all, and said I needed to be there since we would be starting some of our busiest work in a couple of months, which I would be gone for on maternity leave anyways, so I'm not sure why she brought it up. But I could talk to HR about leave options if I am truly having trouble working. By the way, it is illegal in my state to require an employee to take leave if there is a reasonable accommodation that can be made instead. Cue malicious compliance. I immediately went to HR and did just that. We talked about options and found out I could start my leave the very next day and still be paid state mandatory leave pay for the extra time. I informed Ronnie that I would be out starting the next day, as I needed to take care of myself. She said, I understand you need to do what's best for you, but you need to understand that I need to do what's best for the team. So yeah, everything I normally managed basically went to crap in my absence, as the other people on the team weren't qualified to do the work, and kept taking time off leading up to my due date instead of learning the basics, while I was still there to teach them. I left detailed procedure notes and workflow lists, but I later found out Ronnie had to pick up all the extra work, and a lot of it never got done, since she didn't have the time. But it was the best for the team, right, boss? Our next story is from DT20. You want me to work 0 overtime? Sure thing, boss. Some context. I work as a manager in a call center. I am nowhere near the phones, and generally do not interact with customers. Rather, I am a knowledge repository for my staff, and handle communication between our team and the client company which we provide support for. We are a technical support team, not a sales or order support, and the devices which we support are very complex consumer electronics. Most of our support time goes to professional installers, and we rarely speak to customers firsthand. In short, my job is to know our policies like the back of my hand, and to know the products we support better than anyone except the designers that engineered them. The secondary part of my job is to coordinate our online chat team, which is generally pretty hands-off other than right as the shift ends, when I generally jump in to monitor any active chats and make sure they close up quickly. I don't want to keep my guys here any longer than necessary. They like it better, and it cuts down on overtime hours for the entire line of business by a lot. This means I generally rack up 15 to 20 minutes of overtime a day, though some days it can be as little as 0, and others as much as an hour. My direct boss knows all about this, and is generally all for it. One day, however, the guy who was in charge of all the support teams, we work with many brands, sent out a memo that management should never be getting overtime. I brought this up with my boss, that this would seriously impact my team, who arranged a meeting with the big boss. Big boss proceeds to tell my boss that no, I cannot rack up any overtime hours. Fine, I get out at a reasonable time every day. I have 0 issue with this. So the next Monday, I log out right when my shift ends. Turns out 3 of my guys were there for an extra hour with last-minute chats. Tuesday, nearly the same story. This continues all through the week. We are bleeding overtime hours for support staff, with most of my team getting nearly an hour of overtime per day. This goes on for a pay period when Big Boss comes back and tells us we were told to reduce overtime hours, that we had somehow racked up even more than we had before. My boss backed me up and told the Big Boss that no, we were told to reduce management overtime hours, and that I had indeed not racked up any overtime. Big Boss asks why overtime hours increased, and I mentioned I stayed to make sure my team had support they needed to get out as early as possible. Big Boss goes, "Well, that makes sense. Keep doing that, but add any overtime to your Friday lunch so you don't rack up overtime." I explained that I can do this, but will still probably get a bit of overtime on Fridays, since the end of the shift is obviously after lunch. Again, cool. Long lunches are nice. This works well for a few weeks. I am making sure I zero out my overtime, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they regretted doing any of this. We were approaching the busy season, getting more and more long chats and calls. I made sure to get Big Boss to email and CC me and my boss this instruction directly. Sure enough, a few weeks later, Monday, I'm there for a whopping hour and 30 minutes trying to get one guy out the door. Tuesday for an hour, Wednesday for an hour 15, and to top it off, 2 whole hours on Thursday. It was a terrible week for the last minute chats. I tally up my makeup time for my lunch, 5 hours and 45 minutes, plus an hour for my normal lunch. I normally worked 4 hours, 1 hour lunch, and then another 4 hours. So that Friday, I came in and explained the situation to my boss. He was cool with me working for only 2 hours and 15 minutes the whole day, because I was doing exactly what the Big Boss said to do. So an hour into my shift, I go on my 6-hour and 45-minute lunch. While I'm enjoying my most of day siesta, the entire line of business is burning down. Chat is so busy we have people waiting 30 minutes to speak with someone. Calls are so busy we have 15 calls waiting. On days like this, I normally jump in the queues as I do not need to document every case like our tier 1s have to, and I'm very good at my job. I can usually knock out a 15 to 20 minute call for a tier 1 in 5 minutes or less. I can easily handle 4 to 5 chats at one time, seriously taking a load off their team. Now, I alone could not save this shift. No way. We were due for a hiring class, and we're working on onboarding new tier 1s at the time. But man, does it look bad to the client when one of your key players is absent all but 2 hours and 15 minutes of one of the busiest days ever for our LOB. I get back in, settle down at my desk, right as the rush is clearing up. The damage was already done, and we were manageable for the rest of the day. Right at the end of my shift, I look and notice that there is no one on our chat, and no queue, so I immediately log out and thank my team for working hard that day. Then Monday comes. I get to meet with the client, Big Boss, and my boss for our weekly meeting. The client is furious about how on Friday, one of our best assets was on a super long lunch break, and Big Boss puts me on the spot and asks why that was. My response was rehearsed. According to company policy established and agreed upon date we met with the Big Boss, I am not to accrue overtime hours. Any hours over 8 worked within the workweek must be made up during my lunch break on Fridays. Big Boss began denying it, when my boss stepped in and was like, "Wait, I got an email about this." He pulls up the email Big Boss sent and shares it on screen in the meeting. Client is pissed, and the corporate rep begins ripping Big Boss a new one on the phone. After ripping into Big Boss, the corp rep speaks to me, telling me to accrue as many hours as needed to make sure my job is done, and that if my company wants to retain this line of business, Big Boss is not to interfere with my generally very successful management, without consulting them and myself. Since then, Big Boss has continued to try to interfere and change how I run my line. However, every time so far, the corporate rep has had my back. They are extremely happy with my work, and know I do a great job. Heck, they even pushed through a large raise for me when Big Boss was blocking my boss's attempts to get me more money. For our last story today, we have a small but fun one, by PM Me Your Anything. Asked wife for help. Got exactly what I asked for. This happened about 2 hours ago. I'm not even mad. I'm impressed. So here I am, taking a quick 30 minutes morning poop while working from home, when I noticed the lack of toilet paper. Knowing I had used the last of it the night before, I concluded that I, in fact, had put myself in this situation. I called my wife, who was upstairs, and asked if she could kindly bring down the white sheets which will free me from the stink trap of my own making. The exact words I used were, "I don't care if it's even half a roll, I just need something." Several excruciating minutes went by. You know, the time when you have finished with everything you wanted to watch/read on your phone, and you are just sitting there with a crappy butt. This was made even worse because I couldn't hear her moving around to bring me the toilet paper. Then my wife appeared. She had a smile on her face. Then she handed me half a roll. She had cut the roll in half. She proceeded to laugh so hard she had to take her Ventolin inhaler. I finished up in the bathroom. When I came out, I told her I only got to wipe half my butt. I'm going to start looking before pooping more often. Alright everyone, that is it for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe, and then I will see you guys in the next video. Cheers!